I'm Meg Rivers. I am here with Chris. Chris, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, my name is Chris Hall. I'm a Director of Process Architecture at IPS. I've been with the firm for about 11 years, and I focus entirely on lab design for the firm.
Where and how is sustainability discussed in labs today?
I recently returned from a sustainability conference in Pittsburgh where I presented a project, and we're finding that in terms of sustainability, the role of decarbonization and how we think longer term in terms of how the building is designed and also operated across time, trying to reduce that carbon footprint to make them more effective and to lessen their global impact on the environment.
What are your clients looking for and or need in a typical project?
I think the big idea there is programming guidance. They have a series of questions and problems they're coming to us with. Maybe they have an existing lab that they're trying to figure out how to grow into something bigger. So they need some order and rationality being brought to that space. So they're looking to us to help them organize those thoughts and think about how they might be able to grow into space moving forward, accommodate new equipment, deal with growth in headcount and staffing to get a better feel for what that actual footprint looks like going forward.
What would you say is the number one question that clients will approach you with as it pertains to sustainability?
They're coming to the table with either official corporate goals that they're trying to meet, or if they're a smaller company, they might have ideas about what they would like to be able to do without a sense of what it might mean to execute it or what the cost impact might be. So they're looking to us to help them understand what that process might be. And cost is only one piece of that, but as stewards of the environment, they're trying to find a happy medium in that role to figure out how it might have an impact in their labs.
What would you say are some of the challenges as it relates to execution?
I think in terms of programming, it's important to get the sustainability team and the players involved in making those decisions at the table as early as possible so that the right folks at the table are thinking about sustainability, but also from a programming perspective, what are the needs of the lab and how they'll grow into that new space, and getting any kind of sustainability goals that are involved at the table at the forefront. At the same time, I think it's also important to consider what is the right method of execution. So in terms of programming and concept design, if there's a speed to market challenge, do we think about EPCMV and getting construction involved early on to help expedite the design and construction process? Thinking about those goals early on, understanding the project challenges early on is really important to help us guide the process across the course of the project.
How are goals usually defined, or maybe how should they be defined?
Typically, a client will come to us with a set of ideas. I have a notion of how many additional technicians I need in the lab over the next 5 or 10 years, or I have new equipment coming in that I'm trying to sort of future-proof my lab for, and how do I do that? And so there's an idea that I have an existing space and I need to grow into something bigger, or we're going to pick up and relocate someplace else, but I don't know what that looks like. How can you help us get there knowing that it can be a pretty complex problem relatively quickly? They know what they know in terms of how the lab works today, but the idea of a forward-thinking notion about what it looks like in the future might be a little bit harder to grasp. And so in the programming phases, we're really looking to identify what those goals are and start giving form to those ideas to figure out what that future state looks like.
So speed to market and sustainability are both in high demand. How can those be successfully integrated?
I think sometimes the client might come to the table thinking that one might impact the other, and they might have notions about how to execute the sustainability portion of the project, or they might have an urgency about time for speed to market, and the idea of trying to merge those ideas could be a challenge. So we feel strongly that it's important to get those sustainability team members, either on our side and the client side, to the table as early as possible so that it's part of the design and conceptualization project from the very beginning, that it's not a sort of a tacked on idea 3 months into design, that we're thinking about that from the very beginning. Another idea that's important is to have the right stakeholders at the table, and not necessarily the users themselves, but if there is a speed to market issue, We might consider bringing on the construction group early to give them a sense of where we're trying to head with schedule so that they're very aware at the beginning about time frame and the demands for ordering new equipment, things of that nature, so that the entire team understands where we're trying to go in the project scope.
When I think of a lot of projects, there are three aspects to it. So there is money, time, and quality. How do you think companies can juggle the three of those successfully? Because a lot of times you get two of those and it's like pick your favorite two.
Right.
So how can we either pick our favorite two or get a little bit of all three?
I think it is a juggling act, absolutely, because of course we want to give them all three and they want all three, but we understand that something might have to give along the way if we're trying to get to a certain dollar amount or a certain schedule amount. And I think it does get back to understanding what the project goals are, keeping track of them during the design of the project, and so as we move into documentation and into construction, that we're trying to stay on target. And as we start to drift away or if ideas start to change about what the new priorities are, the communication is key, that everyone understands, okay, the ideas have shifted a bit, the cost might be rising or we might be lagging in schedule, but we're all well aware of how we got to this place and we're always trying to tack along the way to make sure that we stay on target as best we can.
How does IPS use technology to improve efficiency and reduce risk for clients?
I think that a lot of times we focus a lot on drawing the building, getting the project done, getting the working drawings finished, writing the specs, and project execution, and then moving on to the next project. And what we've started to do recently is taking a step back and thinking about how we can start using data analysis and looking back at what we've just done to see if there are metrics or benchmarking ideas that can help speak to a little more to the performance of how our projects are going from a utilization standpoint. The idea being that doing more of that kind of work, understanding trends that might be coming out of multiple designs, looking at those holistically, that could be an opportunity to explain to future clients where we see their spaces going. That it's not just simply rote rules of thumb or metrics they might have that are internal, but sort of real-time ideas based on recent work about where we might see their program going. Knowing that there's not a true right or wrong answer, but it's just more backup to provide for that. Another idea that we have been working on are just very fundamental ideas about calculators that can figure out, based on equipment and head count, how big the rooms might be, even before a sketch is put to paper, so to speak. So trying to give a very quick thumbnail sketch idea about sizing. If there's a notion about the dollars or a square foot restriction that the client might have, we could raise a flag right away to say, we need a little more space, or you're fine, that's more than enough space. Trying to get more cost certainty, design certainty introduced into the project as early as we can. Using this kind of data analysis we find is another way to shore up the ideas as we begin that programming phase and then move deeper into design.
Do you typically work with clients that are building a facility from the ground up, or is it existing facilities that are like, I don't know, that need tweaks or changes or additional stuff?
It can be a lot of both. There can be greenfield where they're really starting from scratch. Here's a plot of land, let's go. A lot of it though is renovation, which can even be more challenging because oftentimes that renovation footprint is a fixed place. And the box is this big, I have this amount of program, can you help? They both have their own challenges. I think that's what makes the programming exercise so important, because if there's too much to be packed into that space, we can raise that flag early and help them understand, okay, there won't be much room for growth in this scenario. And if you're okay with that, that's okay. But if you need more space, maybe this isn't the right space to put the project in. So in those early phases where we're trying to understand the project scope, that's a quick way to understand whether we're on the right track or not.
I feel like when you're talking about facilities, it's not just how much floor space you have, it's I have these machines currently, how do I fit them in here? How much does that factor into
that
everything?
one, I mean, I mentioned before this idea of equipment and head count, and sort of multiplying those together would sort of infer a size. And that's sort of largely true. But then there's the things that I don't know. So future equipment that might be bigger, might be smaller. It might replace the 6 pieces that I have on that bench over there. Well, what does that world look like if I don't know what it looks like? So we're always having to also think about room for expansion, not just in terms of people, but also in terms of equipment. Does it get bigger? Does it get smaller? What happens if the lab starts becoming more virtual and I'm doing more stuff online, up in the cloud that doesn't require bench space? Does that mean I shrink? Maybe. So we're always trying to future-proof as much as we can, knowing that we don't know all of it, but trying to give them a client a window to understand what the future might look like.
When you're planning and you're trying to plan ahead for a lot of these question marks, do you try and plan in X amount of empty space, for lack of a better term, just in case? Like, how much would you plan? Sometimes
it comes, there's not a straight rule of thumb. Sometimes the client has an idea that this strategy will cover me for about 5 years. Let's try to find a bit of space next door that would let me grow into years 7 through 10. Sometimes they just simply don't know. And in the right circumstance, if it's a renovation, there might be a fixed footprint that we're working with, and so what's left is the expansion. But if I'm designing from scratch, I want to think about, okay, do I want to leave a few extra modules available for some lab growth at the end of the aisle, so to speak, so that I have that room? So it's definitely an ongoing conversation throughout the design process. There certainly will be ideas up front about what that looks like, but then as we start to test the programming ideas, getting the stakeholders at the table and working through the process, then we start to refine that notion. And sometimes there might not be money to support it. It might introduce an idea about phasing, that maybe I can't build the whole lab at once. Or maybe the lab has to stay running because tests are being done. I can't shut down while it's expanding. What does that phasing look like? So it can become a very intricate sort of surgical idea of what execution looks like. So it's a give and take of understanding what the client needs are, and then bringing our expertise to the table to try to figure out the best means forward to get them to where they're trying to go. It sounds like if you have existing manufacturing going on, that it might be a very modular approach when you're expanding. It can be. I can think of, especially with, I'll say, with QC, quality control labs. They're up and running and they never stop. And you just can't simply say, okay, we're going to take a break for a few months and build a new lab. It doesn't work that way. Those testing procedures have to continue. So does that mean, for example, that I need to find swing space to build a new lab beside the existing one, and then eventually move those folks in as I grow the overall footprint? Makes me think of bridges, right? Where you have the new bridge next to the old bridge. Exactly. That traffic can't stop while we're waiting for the new bridge to get built. That's a great analogy. But it could also be that maybe there's a modular lab that's out in the parking lot, and we have to put them there while we're renovating the existing space. So it really, there are limitless possibilities as to what it could be, but the recurring theme in a renovation, especially on the quality side, is that it can't go away. You don't have that luxury of being able to shut it off as you're waiting for the new one to come online. When you're planning ahead for your clients and you're planning in X amount of free space, and okay, maybe you're going to have new manufacturing machines, what is your ideal planning ahead time frame, for lack of a better phrasing? Are you planning ahead with clients 10 years out, 15 years out? Like, what is the ideal planning out time? That's a great question. I mean, in the programming phase, we're usually trying to get them at least to 5 to 10 years. And then beyond that, it's really pure conjecture. Usually they'll have a very strong sense of what year 3 looks like, maybe year 5. When you start getting beyond that, at least in lab planning, it gets to be a little bit tougher because of those other variables I mentioned before. So what does my future headcount look like if everything's going automated? Is my headcount actually going to decrease over time? So the idea of a metric of headcount and equipment is sort of episodic. It depends. Today I might have an answer that looks like 7, and tomorrow it might be a 5, depending on where we're heading. And a lot of times the client would have a sense of what their own internal trending might be, but at the end of the day, they only know so much. And so they're looking to us to help sort of connect the dots beyond the piece that they don't know. Maybe that's being cross-checked against their own internal standards. And then there's always going to be budget and time constraints. So the other two that you mentioned are also going to come to bear. So What's interesting about programming is that in a way you're designing outside of those other parameters to tell an ideal story. Here are the things that you've told me that you want to get. I think that program looks like this. And as we start to build that out, eventually the dollars come in, the schedule comes in to sort of right size it or sort of bring it back into reality. So you always have those somewhat competing interests that you're trying to rectify holistically as best you can. That's why the communication is so important, so that the team is aware of where we're heading. And if we start drifting off course, we try to bring it back in so that we land at a place at the end where the client is happiest.
Chris, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it.